March 3rd. I've always kind of hated my brother. Well, hate's a strong word. I just always hated how easy everything was for him. He's 2 years older than me, but everything just comes so easily to him. In high school, he was in ROTC, taking courses in criminal justice, so he could get a leg up on his law enforcement career. He had a string of friends and girlfriends and made his high school years amazing. He never seemed to study, always retaining what he needed for tests, and finished his high school a half a year early with a nearly perfect GPA. He didn't need to. He could have just joined the police academy right out of high school, but he chose to join the Army for 4 years, saying it was his duty to his country. He served as an MP and later as a base investigator for base-related crimes. When he got out, he was practically ready to start police work already. Now he's a hotshot detective, while the only thing I got out of high school was an unfavorable comparison to my perfect older brother and too many bullies to count. But it looks like his streak's coming to an end now, while this new string of murders keeps piling up. They're calling him the West End Cannibal, and his crimes are truly horrific. He meets women online, pretty common in this day and age, and then he murders them in their own homes. He cuts them open, sometimes stealing their organs, and they found bites and burns on them as well. The missing organs lead them to believe that he's eating them, but they don't really seem to have any proof. My brother talks ceaselessly about this guy during our weekly meetups to have a beer and talk about life. This is something he insists on, since it gives him an opportunity to talk about himself. My work is so boring that no one in their right mind would want to hear about it. Very little happens to me that would make anyone want to hear about my life. Probably why I'm still single. The crux of it is, my brother told me last week, as he sat on his stool at O'Malley's, is that I don't think the bites belong to him. We found dental records from 3 different sets of teeth, and one of them came back with dental records on a recently deceased person. So what, he grave robs too? I asked, not really interested, but wanting to hear him flounder. The guy's still buried, though. We exhumed his body. His wife was right pissed, and we found his teeth intact. We're chasing our tails here. This guy hasn't given us a lot to work with, and his body count is nearly in the double digits now. I pretended to be speculative, but really I was laughing into my beer at him. My perfect brother, so confident and sure of himself, was being thwarted by some nobody. I had sat on this stool for years, just waiting for a story like this. I know it sounds petty, but I like to see him unsure of himself. It makes me realize that he's just as human as I am. March 12th. There were another 2 murders this week. He called me this time, not having time for a beer as the department scrambled to figure this out. I just don't get it, he said, and his voice sounded tired. This guy's a genuine ghost. We have him picking up his first victim on Tinder, but his second victim was some random woman from a bar. Jesus, but he really did a number on her. He slashed off one of her breasts. We found it in the corner. All of her organs were just strewn about the bathroom. We had kind of thought that maybe he was selling them or something, but now he's not even taking them with him. He's just dismembering them and leaving them sitting around. I pretended to listen, cleaning up so I could get home as I prepared to leave my job. But my face likely looked like a kid on Christmas morning. He was really worried about this. He was really worried that he couldn't solve this case. I remember a year ago I watched something similar happen, feeling that this would be the moment of his failure, and wanting to see it. When he caught the guy, a middle-aged cubicle jockey who was murdering prostitutes instead of buying a Jaguar like everyone else who has a midlife crisis, I had watched him crow about it in the press conference and tried not to puke. If pride came before a fall, then his fall was a long time coming. I don't know what I'm gonna do, bro. I've been sleeping like shit. I think Carol is starting to suspect that I'm cheating on her. Are you? I asked, ready to put some more arrows in my quiver. No, of course not. I made a note of his quick dismissal, doubting it and saving it for later. But she sees these long hours and jumps to conclusions. I'm out all night pounding the pavement, going over evidence, so I must be out having some kind of affair or sleeping with someone at my office. I can't understand it. I've always taken care of her and the kids. I don't know where all this is coming from. Are you on the job now? Yeah, we're driving to a scene now. I'm hoping like hell it's just a copycat, someone who's a little sloppier than this guy. We tried to keep this out of the news, but when 10 girls get cut up like this, it's almost impossible to keep quiet. I need to catch this guy. My reputation's on the line here. My boss, I could hear him reach up and rub the bridge of his nose, is really coming down on me. We're here. I gotta go. Be safe out there, little brother. There's a lot of crazies out there. I smirked as he hung up, glad to hear he was worried. Maybe this would end his career, let him see how us normal people lived in the muck of disappointment for a while. Hadn't I lived for most of my life like that? Did my parents throw me a party or buy me a car when I finished college? Had they helped me take my state boards or paid for all kinds of test prep that I didn't need and desperately had wanted? Did they constantly talk about my perfect job and perfect family every time they called to see how I was doing? No, they didn't give a shit about me any more than he did. He just wanted a sounding board for his ideas and someone to nod and tell him, "Sure, big bro, you're so right." Maybe it was his turn to be wrong for a change. March 21st. He must be getting desperate. He actually asked me to come and take a look at a crime scene with him. I was just heading to the bar, ready to be regaled on how he could have possibly let this guy kill 13 women and still have no idea who he was, when he called me. He sounded even more frantic this time. The lack of sleep was starting to catch up with him, I could tell, and he sounded like a cornered animal. I didn't let the glee leak into my voice as I listened to him, but I don't see how he couldn't hear it. "Hey, would you mind giving me a second set of eyes?" Eyes? For what? "We found number 14 today. This guy, I swear, he doesn't seem to sleep. He just finds these women and kills them without hesitation. I don't know what to do. I'm coming up with nothing. We found more weird bites on this one, and I feel like maybe you should come take a look. I don't know, give me some insight." "Well, I'm no detective. I don't see how I could be of any help." "No, but you work at the mortuary. Maybe you can notice something on the body or notice something on the bites. All my guys are coming up with a blank here, bro. Anything you could tell me would be amazing." I contemplated telling him I was busy, but I thought better of it. Maybe I could help him out. Give him some insight. Wouldn't that just burn him righteously? He picked me up near my apartment, and we rode to the crime scene in silence. My brother kept his eyes forward, but he looked like a smack addict as he snuck glances at me. His hair was unkempt, his ordinarily smooth face covered in coarse stubble, and he shook a little as he drove. I assumed he was past coffee and he'd moved on to caffeine pills as he neared his third week of dealing with these murders. What must Carol think of her husband now that he had completely fallen apart? When we pulled up to the motel, a dingy little place near the interstate, he put a hand on my arm before I got out and looked at me darkly. "I want to thank you for agreeing to this. It's pretty brutal in there. Nothing I'm sure you're not used to, though. I'm up against it, bro. I don't know what to do." And when he said it, he started crying. "I've never had it this hard. This guy, it's like he's playing with me. He's always one step ahead of me, and my investigators, I don't know what I'm going to do if I can't solve this case. The chief is really coming down on me, and if I can't give him answers, I'm going to lose my place as squad leader. I need some help. Do you think you could help me?" I almost couldn't hold my smile. He wanted my help? This was like Christmas and New Year's and losing my virginity rolled all into one. My perfect brother wanted my help. I could just freeze it and eat it. It was so sweet. I agreed, patting his hand and telling him I would do what I could. We moved into the room, and I could see the body hadn't been moved. The room was a mess, blood everywhere, little cards with numbers on them marking organs and cast-off items. The woman's clothes were laying beside the bed, a long hypodermic needle nestled in the bedclothes beside her body. She was splayed out on the bed itself, and her dead eyes looked up at the ceiling. He let me come in, said he'd explain my footprints if it came to it, and gave me gloves just in case. We stood over the bed on opposite sides, my brother looking ready to pop as I assessed the crime scene with my untrained eye. "We got a tip-off about an hour ago. Guy called ahead and had the room key waiting at the desk. He sent the girl in to get the key and used a prepaid card so they couldn't track his activity. The card had his transaction on it, and the activity notice was 2 weeks old. He activated it from a burner cell that is currently pinging from a landfill, so we assume he got rid of it. He brought the girl in, shot her full of muscle relaxer, and then he murdered her. No cameras around to see him, no clerk to ID him. No nothing. Left on foot about 2 hours ago, and left the girl in her car here. You sure it was the same guy? I asked. No, but the MO is the same. Organs removed with surgical skill, medical-grade muscle relaxer used to subdue her. No prints found anywhere, and he left her to be found like this. Didn't you say he usually kills them at their homes, though? Yeah, but she was different. Miss Melinda Ka had a husband who was at home at the time of her murder. She brought her lover here so they wouldn't get caught. Boy, did she bet on the wrong guy. I took a look around, under the bed and beside the mattress, before moving into the bathroom. I looked studiously around the motel sink and the long plastic tub. He deposited most of her organs into the sink, writing cheater on the glass in her blood before throwing her heart into the toilet. It was all still as he'd left it. The cops had moved nothing, but it certainly let people know what they were dealing with. After about a half hour of looking, I turned back and shrugged. Sorry, I don't see anything different. Did you, by chance, find out what kind of muscle relaxer the killer was using? No, he must have took it with him. Well, whoever opened her up knows his way around a set of instruments. The cuts aren't sloppy, and the organs were removed with care, but I'm guessing you had figured that out by the 14th body. Yeah, we've been canvassing databases for doctors, surgeons, even veterinarians. So far, nothing. I shrugged again. I don't know. You're the cop, not me. All I can tell you is what I see. It's fine. I'll call you a cab. I really want to stay and have a look at the scene again. Thanks for your help, though. I really appreciate it. He was talking on the phone as I left, calling that cab. As he finished, I heard his phone chirp again, and he answered it. I showed myself out, lingering by the door as a gentle sprinkle of rain began. I could hear him talking to someone through the open door, and it didn't sound work-related. He was telling someone about his hard day, and how the case was killing him, and they must have said something that made him laugh, because his next words seemed a little more upbeat. He told them where he was if they wanted to come visit him at work. I could use a shower like you wouldn't believe. Maybe I'll get a room as far away from this one as possible, and tell my wife I'm working late again. I smirked as the cab rolled up. Seems my hunch about his extramarital affair was correct. Seems my brother wasn't as perfect as everyone thought. April 4th. My brother just called me, but I doubt he'll be here on time. They found another victim, number 20 actually, and my brother was more than a little upset about it. He called me from the scene, and I could hear other cops in the background as he stepped out of the apartment. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice husky. "My apartment. Is something wrong?" He just breathed heavily for a moment as I heard the elevator open and close in the background. "Dee Dee is dead," he said with a little sob as he put his back against the wall in that way he does when news hits him hard. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't think I know who that is." She was... Look, I'm having a hard time, okay? Carol was icing me out at home. This case is really getting to me, and Dee Dee was just... She was there for me, okay? I nodded, setting the box I was carrying onto my coffee table as I went back for another one. "So you were having an affair?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah," he said, sounding like I had wrung the omission out of him. "And now this killer you can't catch has caught her. Am I mistaken?" "Yeah, you have no idea how much effort it took to pretend like I didn't know her. I had to stand in that apartment, smelling her perfume, smelling her hot blood, and just... But I think I might have finally caught a lead." "Oh?" I set the box down next to the other one, feigning surprise. "I need you to stay where you are, okay? I want to talk to you about what I may or may not know. I need to talk to you before anyone else talks to you. Can you do that?" I smiled at the phone. "I'll be right here when you get here. Don't worry. I'm always here for you, big brother." He hung up then, and I tossed the phone into a corner somewhere as I arranged the boxes. I wouldn't need it anymore. The noose hung over the table like a surprised voyeur. Beneath it sat boxes of evidence, trinkets I'd taken from my victims, the scalpel I'd used to dissect them, and, of course, the vial of muscle relaxer I'd taken from the scene of the very crime he had asked me to come and have a look at. I know you'll read this, big brother, So I have to thank you for the tag-along on that one. I'd been absolutely certain that you were calling me to let me know you wanted me to come to the station that day. I had just noticed that the vial was missing. A vial with my name on it and everything. I couldn't believe I had been that sloppy. Your forensics team was sure to have found it, and my little plan would be up in smoke. When you asked me to come along, I honestly thought it was a setup. When you asked me to have a look at the scene and tell you what I thought, I was sure it was a setup. When the vial was still there beside the mattress, hidden in a little notch beside the frame, I could have thanked God if I believed in anything so archaic. It was easy to put it in my pocket and continue looking around, your addled brain too fixated on your own crime scene to see me as more than a mouthpiece for what you already knew. You see, the answer should have been clear from the start. You checked the surgeons, the doctors, the veterinarians. That was a slap in the face, I can tell you. But you never thought to check the people who take fucking organs out of dead bodies every day, you moron. It was easy to stay one step ahead of you. I've been sitting on that bar stool and listening to you detail how you catch criminals for years. I had all my ducks in a row from the first murder. I was one step ahead of you before you even knew I existed. And now I will be your greatest failure. You will never catch me, big brother, because when you find this journal, I'll already be dead. This will leave you with a tricky little dilemma. You could inform your colleagues that I was the murderer this whole time. You could admit that you sat right across from me and fed me case-specific information while being unable to identify a murderer in your own family. You could tell them this, but you know that your reputation will suffer for it, and that it will be very difficult for them to trust you after this little revelation. Or you could cover it up, dispose of all the evidence that I've gathered, and pretend that the murderer just stopped killing. You could technically get the win. No more murderers means no more shame of being unable to solve them. But you would know, wouldn't you? You would know that I had beaten you, that I had won, and you would have to live with that understanding for the rest of your life. Choice is yours, big brother. I'm about to make mine right now. The job was too good to be true. I understand that now. The message had popped up in my inbox like 1,000 before it. It sat nestled between a Buy Viagra Online and a Congratulations, you've just win a free iPad email. But as I hovered my mouse over it, I found myself intrigued by the tagline. I could usually spot spam messages, even the ones my inbox seemed incapable of catching. This one, though, something about it caught my eye. The spelling and grammar were on point, and something about it just screamed attention. I moved my cursor over the box and hovered it over the email, preparing to break the cardinal rule. I read the title one more time. Mazzer Inc. seeking subjects for free at-home testing. I clicked it, and a very official-looking email informed me that I had been randomly selected to take part in a clinical trial. The email detailed the parameters for this test, the time frame for the test, and the payment method for completion of the test. The parameters were basically A. Take the required supplement they sent you with breakfast and dinner. B. Sign on and watch a series of videos every day for 2 hours. They would involve color patterns, pictographs, and several other standard mental tests. And C. You wear the required Mazzer Inc. monitor device while I slept so they could monitor my brain activity and the effects of the supplement. For the price they were quoting, it sounded like a great job. I'd have been a fool not to look into it. I looked the company up online first. It's pretty easy to see which companies are scams these days and which are legit. Mazzer Inc. was a publicly traded company, and they did a lot of business in pharmaceuticals and healthcare. They had a few squibs in the news about questionable business practices, but who didn't these days? At the end of the day, they looked on the level, so I applied to their email, thinking I'd never hear back from them again. The return email came a few hours later, thanking me for agreeing to the trial and saying they would ship out my initial package and my initial payment the same day. 3 days later, there was a brown cardboard box on my front doorstep from Mazzer Inc., the logo stamped prominently across the side of the box. I hadn't expected it so soon, but the extra money was a nice bonus. Most of my work has been from home these days, and the little bit of it that I was getting was barely keeping the lights on and the rent paid. COVID was still making working in an office difficult, and in these troubled times, every little bit helped. I opened the box and found 8 bottles of something called Neuro Boost. They came in standard 120 capsule bottles and looked perfectly normal, just like something you'd buy at CVS. The monitor turned out to be something similar to an Apple Watch. It had a shiny black band and a smart little face that displayed heart rate, blood pressure, and other general health statistics. I slipped it on, but was confused when I didn't see anywhere to charge it. I shrugged, figuring maybe the internal batteries would last a while. There was also a check stapled to a set of instructions telling me how to get onto the Mazzer Inc website so that I could take my daily mandatory testing. For the amount they were paying, it seemed like a pretty sweet deal if all I had to do was watch a few videos and take some pills and watch the movies for 2 hours a day. When I got up the next morning, there was a bright display on the front of the watch reminding me to take my pills and do my training. So I got up and made some breakfast, took my pills, and got ready for my day. The pills were oily and gave me some fairly rancid burps, but they weren't too bad. When the watch reminded me at noon that I needed to take my training for the day, I sat down at my computer and got to it. The videos were mostly a series of color patterns, flashing in quick succession, as well as a series of brain games that had me doing math or solving puzzles. I guess the pills were supposed to boost my cognitive functions, and I wanted to see if it had affected my scores on the games as badly as the text did. If it did, I couldn't tell. And after my mandatory 2 hours, I closed it up and opened my work folder to see if there was anything new from the office. For the next couple of weeks, everything was fine. I took my pills twice a day, did my mandatory testing, and wore my armband religiously. I found that I liked having it on after a while. It was very comfortable, and being able to glance down and look at my vitals was kind of nice. I've never really had the money for fancy tech, so having something that sort of looked like fancy tech was nice. At the time, I would have told you everything was fine for about the first 2 weeks. But after a few days, I began to notice some strange things around my apartment. It was subtle stuff at first. Things moved, items missing that reappeared a few days later, but it was something more subtle than that as well. Sometimes it felt like someone else had been in my apartment, but that was crazy. The chain was always on, the door was always locked, and, at least to my knowledge, I was the only one that had been in my house since about a week before the quarantine. I thought at the time that I was just being neurotic, but now that I look back on it, I'm pretty sure there was more to it than I was picking up on. The first real sign came to me while I was watching the color patterns one day. I'd been taking the pills for about 2 weeks when one day I watched the colors go from quick flashes of green and blue and yellow and saw a picture. It was just for a second, nothing really substantial, but it looked like a street. It wasn't a street that I knew, and it looked as though it had been torn up by something. I didn't get a good look at it. It was only a flash for a second, but I had to double take to see if I had actually seen what I'd seen. I kept a closer eye on them from then on, but I didn't see anything else that day. The program moved on to math problems a few seconds later, but I never quite forgot about that picture for the rest of the day. That's probably why I remembered it later. I was scrolling through Facebook later, just getting ready to drop off, kind of checking it over without really reading anything, when a friend's post jumped out at me. He was ex-military, and he was talking about an attack in Kabul that day, talking about how the military needed to do more or something, when the same street appeared in his picture. It had been the site of a bombing, and the street was destroyed, just as I'd seen it earlier. I sat dry-mouthed for a minute, just mulling it over in my head. The longer I did, the more I kind of began to make excuses for it. It was very strange, but I eventually chalked it up to similarities. I hadn't actually seen that particular street. I was just seeing it now and associating it with what I'd seen earlier. There was no way I had seen the site of an attack before it had even happened. It just wasn't the sort of thing that normal people did. I turned my phone off and rolled over, going to sleep as I told myself it had never come up again. The next day, however, I woke up and found that my shoes were missing. It wasn't like they were expensive or anything, just a pair of Walmart New Balances, but it was the fact that they were missing that confused me. I'd set them beside the door 4 days ago when I'd last left the house. There was no reason in the world that they should be gone, but they were. I could still see the mud from the running track on the carpet by the door, the only proof that they'd been there at all. I searched the house, thinking maybe I'd just put them down somewhere and forgotten about it, but they were nowhere to be found. That made me worried, but again, I put it out of my mind. I was just going stir-crazy from the quarantine, that was all. I just needed to get out more. I'd been taking the pills for about a month when I started seeing more pictures. It happened suddenly. One minute I was seeing red and yellow and blue and purple go by, and the next second they were solidifying into pictures. A Walmart somewhere, a Jeep out in the desert, a shoe left on a beach, a bunch of sunflowers, on and on and on. The colors were gone. I never saw them again. From then on, it was just random pictures. I called the number on the back of the bottle after reading it over to see if there were any side effects. After finding the helpline, the one that says to call if you have any adverse reactions, I waited for the robot call to cease and for a person to pick up. To my surprise, someone picked up right away, and I was spared the indignity of wading through the muck. The lady in customer service listened to what I had to say, took down my employee ID, and told me that this was completely normal. She told me that lots of people reported the colors becoming pictures. It was actually very common to get these sort of calls. She said that if it became anything worrisome, to let them know, but seeing the pictures was completely natural. I hung up, feeling a lot better. I kept feeling better until that night. Until I woke up in the middle of my living room with no earthly idea how I'd gotten there. I had my hand wrapped around the doorknob, and I was fully dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. I was wearing a pair of black boots that I didn't recognize, and I had my car keys in my hand. I'd clearly been going somewhere, but I had no memory of deciding to leave. I'd been getting ready for bed the last I remembered, easing under the covers and just getting snug down for the evening. I remembered falling asleep, though I clearly didn't remember waking back up. I sat up for the rest of the night, a cup of coffee in hand to make sure that I didn't try to slip off and sleepwalk somewhere. I had never had a history of sleepwalking, but I'd heard that people could pick it up later in life. Sleep dressing yourself and sleep driving were something I'd never heard of, but I suppose anything was possible. That day I went out and bought a stopper to put under the door. I bought a flipper lock and installed it myself. I would have put a second deadbolt on as well if I hadn't rented the apartment. I thought if I made it more difficult for myself to leave, I might not sleepwalk outside. If I wanted to blunder around my apartment, that was one thing. Going out with no memory of the outside was another, especially if I'd been intending to drive. I had been taking the pills for about 2 months at this point, but I never equated them to what was going on. I think maybe I just didn't want to. I liked the way they made me feel, and I especially liked the extra money I was getting every month for taking them. Some of the pictures I'd been seeing had come up again. The shoe on the beach had turned out to be a little card from a plane crash over Spain. The Walmart had been celebrating its 20-year anniversary when someone had driven a car through the festivities. I had stopped really looking for them anywhere. I didn't really want to know what they were. I had my own problems to worry about. I'd woken up several times since the first night, standing in different rooms and having no clue how I'd gotten there. I woke up in the kitchen, toast burning in the toaster. I shook awake in the shower, fully clothed as the water fell over me. I came to on the floor of my living room with my legs under the couch, and I awoke several times as I fumbled at the lock on my apartment. Whatever was happening to me, my body seemed to be trying to keep me from hurting myself, and for that I was pretty grateful. I think my body knew the pills were doing something strange to me, but my brain was trying its best to justify the actions. It seemed like my brain might be keeping secrets from the rest of us, secrets that I would find out pretty soon. Then one day, I woke up somewhere different. I woke up as I was standing in a factory, preparing to break a tank full of cloudy liquid with a fire axe. I dropped the axe that I'd been preparing to shatter the glass with and looked around in confusion. Where the hell was I? How had I gotten here? I looked around and could see other people causing general destruction as well, but they didn't seem to have come to like I had. They were destroying lab equipment, factory equipment, and anything else they could get their hands on. They were like a group of mindless ants, swarming over everything they couldn't destroy themselves and wrecking it with sheer numbers. I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew I had to get the hell out of there. No one came to stop me as I ran, so I took off and didn't stop running till I was outside. Turned out I was actually somewhere I knew. I'd been inside the Terminus Chemical Building. I'd seen the building many times from the freeway, but I'd never actually been inside it. I had a vague idea of what they did, medical research or chemical trials or something, but I couldn't have told you why I'd been there destroying things. I started moving, making my way for the freeway, and when I got there I managed to thumb a ride and get back to the general vicinity of my apartment. It was the middle of the night when I got out of the building, and the sun was just starting to get up when I got home. For the next 3 days I stayed inside and strapped myself into bed every night. I stopped taking the pills and stopped logging onto the website for my daily training. It appeared that I might have lost my monitor while I was busily destroying the factory, but I was honestly glad to have it off me. My phone rang a few times from unlisted phone numbers, but I never picked them up. I was done taking their drugs and being their guinea pig, if that's all I was. On the third day, someone knocked on the door. After a few minutes of peeking through the peephole, I opened it slowly and glanced mousily through the crack. The monitor was on the front mat, sitting like a bomb on the rough fibers. On top was a note, my name written on the back of a folded Polaroid. I reached for it, not wanting it, but needing to see it. The picture was no grainy Polaroid, but a highly detailed photo of me as I smashed a tank of cloudy liquid with the axe I'd swung that night. On the picture was a little caption that read, "Can you see any colors in this picture? Take your pills, do your training, put on your monitor, and get back to work, lest we send this picture to the police and let them know what you've been up to on your nightly excursions." I looked at the sign over the register and scoffed loudly. It hung above the bowl of fortune cookies like a silent guardian, and it had never made any sense to me. Customers are cautioned to take one fortune cookie. Taking more than one cookie may be hazardous to the customer's health and sanity. Management. I'd been coming to Yinshi Guzo for the last 10 years, and that sign had always sort of made me roll my eyes. The food this place made was well worth the 5-minute walk from my house, and I had never gotten sick here as I had at other Chinese restaurants. The food was great, the price was fair, and the customer service was second to none. Yinshi Guzo was a place I came to when I was depressed. It was the place I came to when I was celebrating, or when I just needed some comfort food at the end of a long day. It was my all-time favorite restaurant, and I couldn't think of anywhere I'd rather eat. I had actually met my wife here 5 years ago, in fact. Her date stood her up, and I was coming in for some takeout. We both sat in the waiting area, her hoping for a table, since the place was bustling, and me just waiting for my takeout, and struck up a conversation. By the time my food came, she had asked me to stay and eat with her, and I agreed. A year later, we were married, and we've been together ever since, and coming back to Yinshi Guzo as well. I was here again on a Friday night, date night for me and Lisa, waiting for our usual. Sesame chicken with pork fried rice for her, General Tso with white rice for me, and an egg roll each. It was crowded. Yinshi Guzo was always crowded. As I stood before the counter, the sign irked me as I saw it again, probably because the cookies here were my all-time favorite part of the meal. The owner is a world-class pastry chef, as well as a great cook. He makes the cakes for the shop, and his fried cheesecake is to die for. I think his fortune cookies, though, are the best I've ever had. I know that some of you are going to tell me that fortune cookies aren't an authentic Asian delicacy, but this guy has embraced them at Yinshi Guzo. He makes them from scratch, putting the fortunes in himself, and they're so buttery and delicious that I could eat them by the ton. He refuses to sell them, though, saying that they're only meant to be enjoyed one at a time, and I can't imagine how much money he loses making them like that. Wrapped delicately in their paper holders, they mocked me from the bowl as I stood looking. Leaning forward, I grabbed about 6 of them and popped them into my pocket. I couldn't tell you why I did it, not really, but it was something that I would come to regret. "Your order, sir," said the voice of Miss Kim as she came back. I jumped, looking guiltily as I smiled and thanked her for the food. As I turned to go, I heard her say something almost too low to hear. "Be careful with those. Remember the rules, sir." I turned back, but she had disappeared behind the curtain that separated the front from the back already. I shook it off. I must have misheard her, I thought to myself, as I took my food and left. I traversed the street, weaving between couples and clumps of people on their way downtown, as I made my way home. As I walked, I felt the cookies shuffling around in my pocket and decided to have one. I reached in and pulled out the hand-wrapped paper cover, looking at the little message scrawled on the outside. Good fortune had been written on it, and I opened the wrapper and picked the fortune out as I ate the delicious cookie in a single bite. It was still soft and warm, and the cookie tasted fresh from the oven. They always seemed to taste like that, and I assumed he made them fresh every day. I looked down at the little paper and thought for a moment that it might have been handwritten, too. Did the owner handwrite his fortunes or something? That level of detail really made these all the more special. I smiled as I read the fortune. Even if it was handwritten, it was still kind of generic for a fortune cookie. Tumultuous times are right around the corner. Aren't they always, I said to myself, putting my key into the lock as I stepped inside. 10 minutes later, I had the wine chilling in the sink, the food transferred to plates, and I'd found the perfect movie on Netflix for us to cuddle up and watch together. I had it all arranged and ready for her. As I switched over to regular TV, the movie primed and ready to play, I looked at my watch and tisked. It was already 8:30. She should have been here by now. She had been working late these past few days, and I was beginning to become worried. I reached into my pocket and pulled out another of the delicious little cookies. I stopped before unwrapping this one, reading the handwritten message on the outside before I opened it. 1 per visit. Don't forget the rules. I felt my brow furrow a little. That was weird. What an odd thing to write on the wrapping of a cookie. I shrugged and pulled it out of its wrapper, pulling the fortune out as I ate the cookie. This one was good, but not as good as they usually were. It was buttery, but a little dry. It tasted like a leftover from yesterday's batch. A sports center came on. I looked at the scrap of paper inside and blew air out in a little chuckle. A loved one is thinking of you. Another classic. My phone rang about that time, and I picked it up, looking at the picture displayed on the home screen. Lisa's smiling face decorated the screen, and I smiled to myself as I picked it up. Hey, honey, you almost here? I got everything ready for date night. Her breathing on the other end was heavy, and it took her a minute to compose herself. Babe, I need to tell you something. I need you to not interrupt me, okay? That made me nervous. Lisa sounded panicked, and I didn't like the thought of her driving while she was in that state. I could hear the sound of her engine in the background, and it sounded like she was driving very fast. I looked at the clock and realized it was later than I thought. Traffic could be nuts this time of night, and I wish she would pull over. Are you okay? You sound like you're... Just listen, and don't interrupt, okay? Okay, said, hoping this would calm her down a little bit. I took out another one of the cookies as she prepared to speak and unwrapped it absent-mindedly, taking the fortune out with a deft hand. I'm pregnant, she said quickly, in a way that made me think she was expecting me to be upset. Quite the contrary. We had been trying to have a baby for years, but couldn't seem to make it stick. We thought we'd finally made it work a few months ago, but she had ended up miscarrying, and it had hit her really hard. She had really fallen into work, staying late and working on her off days, and these date nights had become our only real time to be together. The news that she was having a baby made me ecstatic. I was confused as to why she was so upset. The cookie was dry as I crunched on it. This one was definitely stale. That's wonderful, dear, I said, through a mouthful of cookie. I'm so happy you... It's not yours, she exclaimed, and the cookie turned to ash in my mouth. I felt it stick in my throat, a dry paste turning to cement, and I hacked it up and spat it on the carpet. It looked a little off as it sat in the congealing mass there, but my mind was not on the cookie. Not mine. How could that be? I've been having an affair for the last 3 months. When we lost Davin, I couldn't get over the depression. Someone at work had been flirting with me for a while, and one night oh God, babe, I don't know what to do. She was crying, and I could already hear it turning jagged and ugly. I wanted to be angry. I tried to be furious, but I couldn't in the face of her sobbing. Come home. We'll work this out, Lisa. We can... Huh? She huffed out, and I heard a loud pop of static before the line went dead. Hello? Hello? Lisa, are you there? Hello? But there was no one. I sat forward, bumping the table and sending the plates I had made spilling onto the ground. I heard the dry snap of the other 2 cookies as they crumbled in my pocket, but I hardly noticed. I tried calling her back, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, becoming more frantic with each phone call until I finally bounced it off the carpet floor in a rage, What the hell was going on? What had happened to Lisa? I felt something papery against my palm, and when I looked up, I saw the fortune was plastered against it. I caught sight of the words, and it quelled my rage with cold fear. Your joy will quickly become ashes in your mouth. What the hell was that? That wasn't a normal fortune. Fortunes from cookies were almost always benign, or at least neutral. Did the owner write these himself? Who the hell would put a thing like that in a cookie? I stared at it for a few minutes before retrieving my phone and trying to call her back. The screen was cracked, but that hardly seemed to matter anymore. As my phone remained silent and hers remained unreachable, I was becoming scared. What if something had happened? The fortune continued to nag at me. So far, each of them had been accurate in their own way. What the heck was going on here? This was too elaborate for a prank, and if it was, it really wasn't amusing. I had started to clean up the food I had spilled when the phone finally began to ring. I grabbed it up and prayed that it would be her face I'd see on the screen. Instead, it was a blocked number. It looked odd through the star pattern of my broken glass, and I sat it down. I could once again feel the broken cookies poking at me from my pocket. I reached in and threw both of them on the table. One of them had come unwrapped, and the fortune stuck to my finger as my hand came free. My curious mind would not allow me to ignore it, though. But now I wished I had. You will receive 2 phone calls. Both will bring you only sorrow. I caught the still ringing phone on the 4th ring. Hello? Lisa? I asked hopefully. Hello. Are you the emergency contact for Miss Lisa Callahan? I am, I answered, unsure of what it wanted. This is Officer Winsman. I'm afraid there's been an accident. Is my wife okay? I asked, still a little hopeful. The officer was silent for a few seconds. I'm gonna need you to come down to St. Mark's and identify our remains. The phone slipped out of my hand again, and I could hear the officer saying hello from the carpet. The last cookie sat on the table, ominous in its white paper holder. The edges of the paper were black, whatever was inside having seeped into it. The covering bore a legend that made my breath hitch, and though I felt my hands reach to open it, I wanted nothing so much as to throw it out the window unread. The black letter on the front read, "Those who do not follow the rules are doomed to live with the consequences." My shaking fingers found the white paper just as the phone went silent. I've been lying on the floor of my apartment, smelling the aroma of old Chinese food for the last 3 hours. I don't know what to do. Someone came to knock on my door, but I ignored them. They said they were with the police, but I don't care. Lisa is lost to me, and I fear that may not be the end. I'm almost glad that it may not be the end. The world outside has quieted some as the night stretches on, and I continue to lay on the carpet in the fetal position, using what may be my last few hours to write this message. The black stuff that poured out of that wrapper, bits of moldy cookie floating amongst it, was nothing next to the message that oozed onto the surface. Your end will not be so quick as hers, it said. So if you read this, and you should see that sign telling you only to take 1 cookie, remember that the rules are there for a reason, and those who do not obey them may be forced to live with the consequences. Everything changed the day that Jarrett Ray killed himself. He had been a YouTube star, an internet darling, and his life had been a TV show since he picked up a guitar. The video of an 8-year-old Jarrett Ray learning his chords is still on his memorial channel. The sight of him playing beside his granddad, the old man smiling and cackling as the young boy devoured his lessons, is tear-jerking. People talk about how you could just tell so-and-so was happy because it was written all over their face. Well, it was true in this case. Bobby Ray, Jarrett's granddad, was truly happy when he watched his grandson play those first halting chords from the chair beside him. He'd tell Jarrett 10 years later, his hands and muscles withered from cancer, that teaching him to play had been the proudest moment of his life. Police have found another apparent suicide in Little Brine today. This brings the death toll into the thousands, with the numbers in the millions expected by the end of the day. I looked up from the tea I'd been making inside. All this because of some stupid tart who couldn't tell when she was supposed to be ashamed. I'd been watching the reports come in all day. After the video had gone viral, it was all anyone could do to keep up with the death toll. All this over a song. All this because someone wrote a song. But it was more than a song, wasn't it? He'd won his 5th grade talent show, his 6th grade, and 7th grade as well. By the time he was in 8th grade, the administration had simply let him close the show. Every year he wrote a new song, just for the occasion, and many of them made their way onto his albums after he'd been discovered. During the interview they did for the documentary, his classmates spoke about how he had left them in tears. They said there would never be anyone like Jarrett, and when Jarrett sang, it was like he was singing just for you, like he was the only other person on Earth. The numbers are only just starting now to solidify. 750,000 deaths worldwide, with another 5 million expected by the end of the day. This is a global crisis, and the numbers are just beginning to come together. Of the nearly 7.5 million people worldwide who watched the video, only those reported have been discovered dead, which begs the question, when will the others surface? I had to watch the news on my old TV set. I had turned off the router and the modem hours ago. I couldn't risk Sophia. I put the thought out of my head immediately. If she couldn't get on her tablet, she'd come out here. There would be no reason for her not to. She'd been home with a fever today, so she'd slept through most of the news reports. Some small part of me was glad I had managed to cloister her. If she had been at school when the video had went live, who knows? Jarrett had started his rise to fame as many did at the time. He recorded himself singing, playing the guitar, and posted it on YouTube. He was a moderate success, the people from his hometown pushing his numbers a little, but he never rose above a few thousand views. When they announced YouTube Talent, an invitation for YouTubers to send in their best and try to get discovered, he submitted his video and found the audience he'd been seeking. The adoration he'd found for his music at school was multiplied by 1 billion, and from there, the sky had been the limit for Jarrett. His music touched people, made them discover things they never knew they'd lost. I can remember fondly when one of his songs had come on the radio at work. For those 2 or 3 minutes as he sang, it was as if no one could have a bad day. No one could be anything less than fantastic and in a wonderful mood, and the world was just a little brighter while he was in it. He was our songbird, but we ultimately took him for granted. Deaths have reached a catastrophic level. 3 million people dead, and somehow the views just keep rising. The death toll is now expected to be somewhere around 250 million before the end, as people go to see what all the fuss is about. News outlets are begging viewers not to indulge their curiosity, as the video has been confirmed to have a nearly 100% death rate thus far. He had met Crystal while guest hosting Saturday Night Live. She had a track record for loving and leaving influencers, breaking their hearts and taking their money if they were dumb enough to marry her. She seemed to have her eyes set on Jarrett. Their love affair was one for the tabloids, a string of fights and makeups, and public declarations of love or anger. She wanted to be a musician, it seemed, and even her middling talent couldn't pull down his star. She appeared with him on several albums, came on stage with him at concerts, but at the end of the day, it was Jarrett they came to see, and she knew it, hated it. She was a 24-year-old time bomb who was about to destroy the world with her need for attention. When she left him after 5 years together, the world sighed with relief. They gasped, however, when she accused him of abuse. She had bruises, a very convincing black eye, and the ear of a tabloid writer who told her whole story in glaring prose and glossy pictures. She made the talk show circuit, telling about her harrowing experience and their toxic relationship. Eventually, Jarrett was called upon to defend himself in the court of public opinion. It was crap. He claimed she had left because she had ultimately gotten everything out of their relationship that she could, other than his name. He was tired of putting up with her tantrums and her public spectacles and was ready to move on with his life. Their relationship was not a sustainable one, and he was looking for more than someone to make bad press with. They had drifted apart, and it was time for them to move on to better things. He was reasonable and adult about the whole matter, but people didn't want reasonable, even with a media darling like Jarrett. She cried and pouted while he sat and reasonably explained, and the audience ate their daily dose of drama. We have reports of a group of students on the roof of a high school in Des Moines. Unresponsive to verbal commands, they are ignoring police as they... Oh God, they've jumped! As emergency services try to save who they can, we can see more students coming out of the emergency hatch and preparing to join their fellow students. His reputation was ruined. There was never any proof that he had or hadn't hurt Crystal, but she fashioned her story into a lucrative book deal and a successful music career. Jarrett, on the other hand, was damaged goods. He was unbookable. His sales plummeted, and his songs slowly stopped playing on the radio. It seemed that no one wanted to be seen supporting a suspected abuser, and his star had now begun to fall. The next 3 years would see him in and out of rehab, falling hard into drug use and depression, and when he came out, he went back to YouTube with something very different. Reports are coming in about a group of men who have set themselves on fire in Kaito. Their dying is quiet, dignified, and they burn without so much as a whimper, Kaito authorities say. When he returned, his music wasn't the same. The upbeat, happy songs full of hope were replaced with melancholy ballads full of despair and hopelessness. Someone sent me one of his songs in a YouTube link once, and I swear you could feel it sucking the air out of the room. He conveyed every ounce of his suffering in his song, and though his views were just as high as they had always been, no one talked about his music now. His music was a monster that was best left under the bed. No one wanted to listen, but their curiosity wouldn't let them look away. We have cell phone footage of 3 men jumping into a cave mouth in Arizona National Park. The cave, usually requiring climbers to rappel to reach the floor, is nearly a mile deep. Emergency services are still attempting to get the bodies, and 2 members of the EMS are said to have joined the jumpers upon their arrival. 2 days ago, Jarrett made his last YouTube video. He finished something haunting, halting, tears streaming down his cheeks as he poured his soul into every note. He played acoustically, and his guitar was not tuned. The jangling melody of his untuned strings were ethereal, almost industrial. As he played, it was like watching some dying animal limp through the forest towards the spot where it will drop. As he came to a close, his voice trailing off painfully, he turned to the camera and thanked the audience. He thanked them for their loyalty, for their time, for their support, and for everything they had shown him during these trying times. He informed his audience that this was the last time he'd be on YouTube, and wished them all a very happy life. Then he turned his camera off and walked away from life as anyone knew it. He killed himself in the bathtub that night. His mother found him with both wrists slit. Though she was horrified, she told someone that he died with the most serene look stretched across his face. Whatever he had been thinking about as he ended it all had given him such joy as he slipped off with it still in his mind. And so, Jarrett played his final song that night and passed into the annals of history. Well, that's not all he did, I suppose. The death toll swells to 3.5 million as medical services scramble to handle the influx of bodies. His death went mostly unremarked. A small service was held for him, and his body was interred in his hometown. A short squib about him went out on social media and on the news circuits. Outside of a handful of fans, though, everyone seemed to be comfortable just to forget about him. His death was sad, of course. The loss of someone so young and so talented is always sad. But people seem ready to move on and put all this behind them. And they would have if it hadn't been for Crystal and a voicemail that should have been private. She appeared on Snapchat one night, raccoon eyes and everything, to tell her fans about a voicemail she had received from Jarrett the night he had killed himself. I was at a charity event when he called, and I completely forgot about it until I saw it tonight in my missed calls. His voicemail lives on as his last words. He wanted me to give a gift, his last gift, and I think it's only right that I share his last moments with all of you. She held the phone up to the microphone, and from it spilled a monotone that no one had ever heard from Jarrett before. "Hello, Chris. I guess you're too busy to talk to me, so just listen. I've written you a song. Remember when I used to do that? It's just for you, so make sure you don't share it with anyone else. something you can remember me by after I'm gone." She looked at the camera and sniffed a little as she smudged her raccoon eyes for effect. "I'll be playing that song live tomorrow night on Facebook. I haven't even heard it yet, but I just know that all of you will want to hear Jarrett's last song live at 8 p.m. on Facebook." True to her word, the very next night she played the song for everyone to hear. Police are again advising people to stay indoors. Close your windows. Do not open the doors unless emergency personnel call for you to do so. There is a fear that others might be weaponizing this phenomenon. The song was nothing like anything we had ever heard before. He had left her 2 messages, it would seem, and the second was a dirge sung a cappella. It was deep and halting, his voice spilling all the angst and pain he'd been keeping inside for 3 years. He bled his words for her, and the nearly 20,000 people who watched, and in the end, he simply hung up and was ended forever. Crystal cried, of course, and talked about how important he was to her, despite how things had ended. She wished that their relationship could have gone on indefinitely, wished they could have spent their lives together, and thanked her fans for experiencing this moment with her. 2 days later, she was dead. Someone has thrown a Molotov cocktail through the doors of the YouTube corporate office. The platform claims to be blameless in all this, but its failure to act in regards to the video's takedown leads others to question its negligence. The next 2 days were awash with odd Facebook posts and strange Snapchat stories from Crystal. She claimed there were people in her house. She did a walking tour of her house in which she shouted at things only she could hear and brandished a knife. She told her fans that she thought Jarrett's ghost was haunting her, trying to get her to kill herself. She had a 2-hour video of nothing but her crying on the floor of her closet as she sobbed that people were outside the door, saying she should drown herself in her swimming pool. It all came to a head on the second day when she posted her final video. At 11:30 p.m., a staggering and slurring Crystal posted one last video to Snapchat. I found these pills in my medicine cabinet. They helped a little, but I can still hear his voice. He's telling me how this is my punishment, how I deserve to die. And you know what? He's right. I ruined Jarrett's career. He never hurt me. I just couldn't stand the idea that he could keep living and loving and being loved by people after I left. I'm a heartless bitch, and I deserve this. They found her in her pool the next day. She was the first casualty, but not the last. Mass panic in Singapore. People take to the streets, looking for their loved ones as the death toll. I heard the door to the back room open as Sophia wandered into the living room. She looked very childlike for a girl of 14, and I was glad for her. Let her be innocent a while longer. She would have to grow up soon enough. She lay her head on my lap, watching the TV with a sense of dread as she took in what was going on. She didn't ask me about her phone. I had slipped in and taken both her phone and her tablet while she was asleep. She only laid her head against my lap and watched the news talk about the deaths in China and the deaths in Russia and the deaths right here in our own hometown. As we watched, I continued to listen as a story that only I could hear played over and over again in my head. He had learned to play the guitar at 8 years old. His grandfather had died of cancer. He was a local celebrity by the time he was 12. Crystal had ruined his life. It was an endless on and on and on. I'd been trying to block it out for the better part of 6 hours, but it just kept going no matter what I did. Someone had posted the video of Crystal's live stream to YouTube shortly before her death. As of this very second, 600 million people had heard what the media was calling Jarrets Dirge, and I was one of those people. Even as the first reports were coming out, I listened to the song via a Facebook link from my sister Pam. Pam had sent me a text an hour ago, saying her farewells and wishing me luck. The voices had been rising in frequency, increasing in volume, with every repetition. As I stroked my daughter's hair, I began to wonder how long I would last. "He learned to play at 8, you know," she said, and the words sent a chill up my spine. "What?" I asked, looking down at Sophia as she lay watching the steadily increasing death toll. "His grandfather taught him to play the guitar at 8 years old. He told him on his deathbed that it was the proudest moment of his life. "Mom, I'm scared. How long is this going to last?" My stroking hands felt clammy as they slid over her straight hair, and as she waited, I realized that I had no answer for her. We were two amongst millions, and we would see how long it took before the Dirge had us as well. I ran into the house and slammed the door behind me. Looking around frantically, I called for my parents. At that moment, I became about 4 years old again. My fear congealed in my guts when I realized they weren't home. They were gone, out of town, wouldn't be back until tomorrow night. That's why I'd been staying at Billy's in the first place. That's why Billy was thump, thump, thump. "Open up, Johnny, I know you're in there," said a slurry voice, sing-songing the words as the owner tried to bowl the door down. I turned and shot the bolt before backing away from the front door as though it might bite me. The wood on the thick old door, solid enough to rattle the windows when it slammed, looked like it was bowing in as whatever was on the other side pushed at the wood. The door warped and twisted and suddenly seemed made of clear film as handprints imposed their image into it. It couldn't be. It just couldn't be. My dad had said that door was a foot thick when he installed it, and now it was bending and warping like melted wax. It was too much. I ran into the kitchen and slammed the door. I threw a chair in front of it, too, for good measure. After I was certain that I had jammed it in there good, I backed away slowly with wide, staring eyes. I jumped suddenly and shrieked like a tea kettle when my jeans-clad bottom came into contact with something solid. I felt stupid when I realized it was just the fridge. Even laughed a little, thinking maybe I'd exaggerated this whole thing. That's when I heard a terrible cracking sound coming from the living room. It was the sound of wood splintering as its dimensions are violated. He'd be through soon. He'd be through, and he'd have me. Patches would be through. Billy, Randall, Scotty, and I had been friends since we were young. We'd been inseparable, thick as thieves, and the terrors of our neighborhood since we were old enough to walk. Don't get me wrong or anything. We weren't bullies. We weren't bad boys. We ate our vegetables. We were in before the streetlights came on. We kept our grades up. We were polite to anyone that we met. The problem was that we liked to play pranks. What child doesn't like to pull a prank now and then? Attack on a teacher's chair, a whoopee cushion on a classmate's seat, a frog in a backpack. We'd done them all, and it had given us a bit of a reputation as troublemakers. When school ended for the summer, and the four of us moved on to middle school, I'm pretty sure the teachers at our old elementary school threw a party to celebrate. We were all just looking forward to summer, a summer of pranks and mischief, but none of us could have foreseen what was to come. After 3 weeks of no school, limited parental supervision, and way too much free time on our hands, we started to get bored. We'd pulled some pranks. Putting mud in Miss Laverne's washing machine had almost gotten us caught, but most people were already wary of us because of our reputation as pranksters, so it was getting hard to pull a really good prank like we wanted. One afternoon, though, the four of us put our heads together and thought of all the people we hadn't pranked yet. And only one person in town came to mind. Patches. The front door crashed open like it had been shot with a cannon, but in the wake of the break-in, I was treated to nothing but a long silence from the living room. No footsteps headed towards the kitchen. No slurry voice trying to call me out. Just a long, uncomfortable silence as I sat with my back against the solid old refrigerator and waited to see what would happen. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3, and when I got to 100, I worked my way up to my feet and took a hesitant step towards the kitchen door. That's when the knob started to turn frantically. It turned left, then right, then left again, and someone pushed against it and swore loudly when the chair stopped it from opening. He slammed against the lame barricade, and I saw one of his bloodshot eyes peek through the crack as it trained onto me. The eye went wide in mirth, and I heard the slurry voice call my name again. He rattled at the door a few more times before opening it as far as he could so I could hear him.
Johnny, 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 Johnny. Don't you want to see what you did to your old pal Patches? Don't you want to see what you and your friends did to me? Maybe when I'm through this door, he slammed his weight against it again, I'll give you a taste of what I gave the others. Billy squealed like a little girl when I twisted his fat head right off his shoulders. He screamed through the door as he put his whole weight into the hit, and the legs of the chair started bucking as it got ready to give. I didn't wait to see what would happen. I tore up the stairs as fast as I could, taking the little staircase in the kitchen. Just as my feet touched the bottom step, I heard the door crash open, and I put on a burst of speed. As I hit the halfway point, something grabbed my ankle, and I fell hard onto the rough wooden steps. I bit my tongue on the way down, and felt my lips split as I hit the stairs. One look at what stood at the bottom, though, and both of those pains were nothing. His hand was wrapped in the same threadbare mittens he'd worn in life, and it clutched my ankle as it looked like his arm stretched from his body, so it hung halfway down the stairs behind him like a fire hose. Patches stood at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in his soiled, cast-off clothes, and grinned his gap-toothed smile, which had become decidedly moldy in death. He started pulling on me as I struggled to get back to my feet. Patches was a tramp, a sort of city pet, and the residents thought he gave our town a colorful appearance. They'd all grown up with Mayberry and Mayfield. Small towns were expected to have a friendly tramp who stole the occasional pie or was caught sleeping off a bottle at the bus station. Patches never stole any pies. He was welcome to a piece on the front porch of almost any house in town. But he was drunk most any old night of the week. He could be seen staggering out of Jemmer's and down to his camp by the river most any old night of the week. He never caused any trouble, though, and the police never felt the need to throw him in the drunk tank or hassle him at all. I would have called us friends at one time. Everybody in town hired Patches to do odd jobs for a little money now and then. He had a rusty old push mower that he'd used to cut people's grass with, and he claimed he'd been a handyman of some sort before the war. He had enough skill with tools to back it up, so most any afternoon he could be seen cutting grass or shoveling snow or fixing something for a few dollars to feed and medicate himself. Medicating is what Dad called it when Patches got drunk. Patches had laughed when I told him so. He fixed my bike tire once, and he'd taken Scotty Randall and I on a hike in the woods once when we had asked if he knew any good camping spots. He was a nice guy, sober or drunk, and I don't think I'd ever seen anyone in town have any trouble with him. We shouldn't have pranked him. It was wrong. I wish now that I could take it back. Pranking him had been Billy's idea, but we'd all gone along with it. Billy's dad owned the hardware store, and he was just about the only guy in town that didn't really trust Patches. Billy's dad had it out for tramps and vags, and he taught his son to be mindful of them as well. Tramps like a no-good dog pretending to be good. He'd tell us when he saw Patches wandering around, "You might pet him 100 times and not get bit, but when you take your eyes off him for half a heartbeat, he'll bite you." I didn't think Patches was like that, but we knew better than to argue with an adult, so we just nodded and said we'd be careful. Billy had a roach, the rubber kind that you got from the joke shop for a nickel, and he put it deep down in a corned beef sandwich and told me to take it over to Patches. "Why me?" I asked, not really wanting to prank Patches, but not wanting to seem chicken. "He trusts you. Your dad's always paying him to do stuff, and I've seen him talking to you on the front porch," Billy said. "He hasn't gotten work for a few days now, what with this heat, and he's probably getting hungry. He'll bite down on that sandwich and see the roach and freak out." We all laughed a little at the thought of Patches biting down on that roach and freaking out. We'd have all freaked out, too, if we found a roach in a sandwich. Afterwards, we'd all have a good laugh and find someone else to prank. He looked up from where he was sunning himself and smiled his gap-toothed smile at me. "Oh, well, hey there, Johnny-O. What you say, old sport?" he asked in his thick southern drawl. "Nothing much. My mom packed me a corned beef sandwich for lunch, but I'm not really a big fan of corned beef. I thought you might like it." I held the sandwich out to him and tried my best not to smile. Patches took the bait at once. "Oh, well, say there, that's mighty fine of you, old sport. Been here a day and a half since I had me any victuals." He took the sandwich and had a big bite, chewing with relish. "By the way, I saw Miss Laverne's washing machine." He slapped his knee as he gave a big donkey laugh. "I was 3 hours cleaning the mud out of that contraption. I guess I should thank you boys for the work." He laughed a little and took another bite, and when he did, I saw the gleaming head of the plastic roach sticking out of the sandwich. I started to point it out, but he kept right on laughing and telling me about the muddy washing machine and how hard it had been to get all the mud out of it. Apparently, he'd had to remove the drum and rinse it in the yard and then put the whole contraption back together. When he'd finished, and it was time to get paid, he took another bite and said through a mouthful of corned beef, "You know that old skinflint only gave me $1 for all that work. She tells me not to spend it all in one place." He brayed more laughter, but as he went to bite again, something happened. He wheezed a bit, his throat working to swallow the load of corned beef, and I realized with horror that he'd swallowed the plastic roach, too. The mat of corned beef and the hard plastic roach were stuck in his throat, and as he coughed and gasped, I realized he was choking. Billy, Randall, and Scotty broke cover and ran over to see what had happened, but by then it was already too late. He had melted to his knees in the dirt, coughing his life out as the wad of half-chewed food hung like plaster in his throat. All the backslapping in the world wouldn't do anything for him. We sent Scotty and Randall to call an ambulance, but Patches was dead before they even left the riverside. His face was a dark purple color at the end as he clawed at his throat. Billy and I clapped him on the back again and again, but we might as well have been slapping a tree trunk. If you've never seen a man choke to death, then you may not know what it looks like. But I'm here to tell you that it's not as clean as it looks on TV. Patches hacked and coughed, tried to bring it up, clawed at his throat until his skin bled, and then, finally, he gave both of us a final look and pitched over onto his face, a look of terror and confusion stamped there forever. The hand gripped my ankle, and I could feel his fingers trying to twist it through the shoe. Maybe he meant to break it. Maybe he just wanted to make me hurt bad enough to let go. Whatever his intention, I wasn't about to play along. I twisted my foot a little and let the sneaker slip off as it slapped back into his palm like a rubber band. Patches howled in rage, but I wasn't going to give him a chance to recover. I sprinted upstairs and slammed my door closed behind me. I shot the lock and pushed the desk in front of the door as I thought about how best to escape. I needed to get out. I needed to escape, but I needed a plan before I went. I grabbed my backpack from the closet and threw some clothes into it, taking the $10 out of my desk I'd been saving for a new bike and putting it in my pocket. I stuffed my scout sleeping bag in as well. I felt a surge of joy for half a second when I remembered my old rifle my dad had used for hunting ducks in the fall, but that joy withered when I remembered that it was locked up in my dad's gun safe in the basement. I settled for a Swiss Army knife and a little fire starter kit that Randall had given me for my birthday, and took one last look around. Some baseball cards went in, maybe I could sell them, and a nice pocket watch my granddad had given me before I stopped and realized it was too quiet outside. Why wasn't he trying to get in? I put my hiking boots on and stuffed some socks into the bag before I slung it on and looked at the window. It would be a long drop to the ground, but I could hang off the kitchen roof and maybe not break my ankle if I was careful. My eyes flicked back to the door, and for a moment, I felt the urge to fling it open and confront my attacker head on. The suicidal urge passed quickly, though, and I crept over to the door and laid my ear against it instead, trying to hear what might be going on the other side. The bang from the other side made me jump back in fright, and Patches laughed his donkey bray. "Ha ha ha ha! Come out, Johnny! There's no escape now!" The ambulance had come, and the paramedics had pronounced him DRT, dead right there. Warner Mads, the fat volunteer firefighter who was on paramedic duty that day, had laughed when he said it, but none of the rest of us found it very funny. We all watched them put him on the stretcher and cover him with a sheet before they slid him into the covered truck they used as an ambulance and took him to Porter's mortuary. We spent the next week in a state of pure dread. "What if they find that roach in his throat?" Randall would say as we tried to get back to normal. "What if they cut him open and find it, and they decide that we killed him?" Billy punched him in the arm after we had all ignored him for about the 1,000th time. "So what if they do? It's not like we meant to kill him. We just wanted to prank him, that's all." "But what?" Randall started, but Billy punched him again, and Randall knocked off so he could rub at his arm. "Shut up, Randy. If you keep talking about it, then someone's going to start asking questions. Why don't you guys come stay over at my house? My dad's working the late shift, and Johnny's parents are out of town, so he's staying with me anyway. We can have a sleepover and forget all about this crap." We all agreed that sounded like fun, and when the sun set Friday night, we were all sitting around a camp lantern in Billy's room telling scary stories. Billy had wanted a fire, but his dad had absolutely forbidden it, and so the best we could hope for was the small lantern on the floor of his room. His mom had gone to bed shortly after dinner, saying how tired she was, and we'd been left to our own devices for hours. We'd played games, watched a little TV in the living room, and raided the kitchen for snacks before finally deciding that it was time for the traditional scary stories. Billy got to tell the first one since it was his house, and he told us about an escaped asylum patient who'd killed the previous owner of this very house. He claimed that on quiet nights you could still hear them begging for their lives, and the almost inaudible sound of a man dragging his knife along the wall as he hunted for the last of the children in the house. Randy got pretty scared, but that was far from new. After Patches, he seemed to be scared by most everything. Thinking of Patches made me think of a story of my own to tell, but I hesitated and let Scotty go first. Scotty told a story about a skinned dog who killed a bunch of boys on a camping trip, and even though a skinned dog with bones poking out and his jaws full of slobber sounded a little scary, it was pretty stupid all told. When one of the boys managed to kill it and discovered that there was a whole pack of them that then ripped him to shreds, we all rolled our eyes and threw our pillows at him. He laughed and threw his back, and one pillow fight later, Billy asked if I had a story. I do, actually, but it's not really a story. I thought I saw Patches the other day. Everyone went quiet. Randall looked like a goose had walked over his grave. Scotty sucked air through his teeth, and Billy punched me in the arm in a less than playful way. "That ain't funny, man. That ain't funny a little bit." But I told him I wasn't joking. I'd seen him on and off for days since his death. Pressed up against the glass of the grocery store, his gap teeth covered in mold and his face a purple and red patchwork. At his old camp when my dad and I drove past, and even when I didn't see him, I could swear I smelled the odor of peppermint candy and rock gut whiskey, the smells of Patches. But last night was the worst yet. I woke up all of a sudden and there was someone standing at the end of my bed. I thought it might be my dad, checking up on me, and then I smelled the peppermint and the sweet smell of alcohol, and I knew who it was. I didn't say anything, but he smiled at me from the foot of my bed, and his mossy teeth glinted in the moonlight. "That was a rotten trick, Johnny," he whispered, and his voice was hoarse and cracking. "Maybe I'll come play a trick on you boys sometime. See how you like it. Sleep tight then." Then I blinked, and he was just gone. They all sat there gape-mouthed for a heartbeat or two, and then Randall started laughing. It wasn't real laughter, not really, but the crazy, jagged laughter that people make when they're scared and they don't know what else to do. He reached out and grabbed a big handful of popcorn and said, "Good one, Johnny," as he stuffed it into his mouth and kept laughing. The laughs turned into gasps, though, as he started to choke on the popcorn. The three of us got up, wanting to stop him before he choked to death, but as he knelt hacking, we could see his hands clawing not at his throat, but at the black-gloved hands wrapped around his neck. Patches had leaned around the back of his head then, grinning like a monster in a movie, and Randall's clutching hands had died like two birds in their death throes. We backed away from him, not sure what to make of this grisly phantom, and he stood to his full height so he could tower over us. Randall lay still on the floor then, his coughing done, and the three of us silently wondered who would be next. "So, Billy, you like roaches, do you?" the cadaverous thing asked, turning towards the terrified boy who stood frozen to the spot. "Well, here then, have some, won't you?" Billy gagged, and a single glistening roach fell from his lips. He stared at it dumbly before he retched, and a cascade of them pattered to the floor and scattered like roaches. He went to all fours and kept vomiting up the glistening insects, his body racked with sobs and heaves as Patches laughed merrily over his handiwork. It was too much. I bolted for the door and never saw what happened to Scotty. I threw open the living room door and ran out into the night, but I could hear the laughter of that mad apparition behind me as I fled for the safety of home. I believed, in my youth, in the talismanic protection of home, and as Patches dogged my heels, I could see it getting closer and closer before me. I found my keys and rammed them into the lock, and as the door closed behind me, I was certain I was safe. Sitting in my room now, I realized I would never be safe again. Sitting on my sleeping bag and writing this down, I realized I haven't been safe for the last 20 years. I fled that night with my backpack and my fear, and God forgive me, I never looked back. I later found out that the deaths of my 3 friends were the talk of the small town, and many believed that I had been abducted by whoever had done the killing. I used the money I had to get as far away as I could from my hometown, and when it was gone, I worked for men who would hire a boy my age to do a day's work. This was 1974, so there were kids on the run all over, and one more didn't really strike much interest. When I couldn't work, I begged, and when I found someone willing to take me in for a few days, I stayed. Eventually, though, I would have to move on again or risk being caught in the shadow of Patches. Patches didn't stay in my hometown, after all. No matter where I went, I would see him somewhere eventually, reflected in the window of a store, half hidden in an alley between 2 buildings. Sometimes I'd smell that sickly sweet smell of him and know it was time to get a move on. I took up the bottle early, and as I got older, I came to realize that in my own sad way, I had become Patches. I'd become a living monument to the man I had killed on accident. And I suppose I was just looking for a place like my hometown where I could feel safe. I guess I've found it now. The truck dropped me off by the familiar river I had so often swam in when I was young, and as the sun set, I found the ragged remains of Patches' old camp. The town has changed, as I knew it would, and the attendant at the corner store gave me a dirty look as I used my last $5 to pick up a bottle of Irish Rose whiskey. I didn't care. By tomorrow, I'd just be another curiosity piece in the local paper. Homeless man found murdered by the river, it would likely say. And after 20 years of running, I guess that's not too bad. The bottle's half gone now. So was the sun as I sit here making my final notes. I'm sitting in the spot where his camp used to be, and the sounds of the river, the frogs and the crickets just tuning up behind me, are almost soothing as I wait for my death to come. He'll find me now, I'm sure of it, and after all this time, it's almost a relief. A shadow has fallen over me, and a familiar voice asks, "You gonna finish that bottle, Johnny?" I looked up into the unchanging face of horror. I hand it up to him and smile. "Guess not."